Okay. Hello, everyone. For those who are joining, we will begin on the dot. So in 3 minutes. So before that, if you want to grab a coffee, get yourself comfortable, we will begin shortly. And also, please feel free to use the chat. Tell us where you're from, who you're representing, where you're dialing in from. We're very curious to see who's coming to our webinars and get this nice and interactive as well.
All right. Hi, Ziad. Hello, Faisal from Afghanistan. Lenny from Tier Fund. Hania, Ian from Practical Action. London. Was just in London last week. Hi, Mario from Indonesia. Wow, that must be late in Indonesia now. Mario from Indonesia, what time is it in Indonesia? Ui, that's commitment.
6 hours ahead. Yeah.
Oh, of course. Timo, you speak Indonesian, right?
Yeah. And
maybe send a greeting to Mario. So he's in. Hi, Laurie in DC. It must be 8 a.m. for you. And Joanna from our friends at Warchild. Hi. Laurie, 9 a.m. Very civilized. Pull up the slides, Ali, okay?
Great, perfect. Super, and thanks everyone for letting us know where you're dialing in from. It's great to see from all corners of the globe today. Wow, and waking up early, thank you. We will be worth it, I promise. I hope you have a coffee as well at hand. Let me know when we're ready to kick it off and I will get started.
Just a quick tech check. Everybody should be able to see the cover slide right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Super. Okay, so I'm going to kick this off. I want to first start by saying hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for dialing in. Today is a big one. We're going to fit magically within 1 hour latest updates on donors, funding briefings, and also insider fundraising trends. So it is going to be a big one. I am Ellie, the Thought Leadership Specialist at MZN. I want to first introduce our panel. So we have Chris, the Managing Director at MZN. We are also joined by Hande and Timo, who are our consultants, joining to give their expert inputs. And we also have a special guest today. So Balaz from Mindwise is logging in to give his expert fundraising tips. Quick note before I hand over to Chris, these slides and recordings will be shared at the end of the webinar. And we also want to give plenty of time for the questions. There will definitely be a lot to discuss. So please leave them in the Q&A function. And yeah, let's get started.
Great. Is that over to me, Ali?
Over to you, Chris.
Perfect. Welcome everybody from all the corners of the world. I've seen DC and Indonesia, lots of people in Africa. So wonderful to be coming together of sorts again for this brief funding view. The task my colleagues and I have today is sort of ridiculous. we are trying to give you in 40 minutes or half an hour a complete overview of what the major donors are doing. So hence why it's only a sort of brief overview, and make it pragmatic for what's happening over the next few months. As Ali just sort of hinted at, we are doing these quarterly. So you will, in 3 months' time, you see the next funding update from all the major donors for what will then be in Europe, at least the autumn of 2023. For now, we're looking at this year, and specifically the next 2-3 months, to give you an idea of the general global funding trends, a bit of an outlook from some selected donors, of course, selected because we couldn't possibly cover them all. And if you want to see more detailed and more tailored funding advice, please refer to our website or just get in touch for our funding support team, who will be able to give you more detailed support. By design, this webinar today is at a pretty high level, but it's hopefully a useful overview. So before we go ahead, we want to tell you how we got to these figures. We do a lot of research, and what's in here today is mainly based on our research between 2018 and last year, particular 2021 and 2022. It's based on working with a fairly large number, over 600 NGOs and social enterprises for the last 12-13 years. And the data that you see here comes from consenting, anonymized, post and present clients, as well as publicly available data since 2011. So here is, that's what we are basing it on. Before we are getting into it, I just want to highlight 3 important aspects of that research. And basically, you can summarize them up as NGOs that grow do 3 things. It's the 3 things here. Ali, I'm not entirely certain that you can see my cursor. Hopefully it does.
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So we've looked at the data for the last 12 years, and we found 3 major things. Basically, NGOs that grow financially, they attract at least 15, around about 30% of unrestricted funds. And these are also 4 times less likely to fall into financial distress than those who do not attract that level of unrestricted income. Also, NGOs that grow focus on maturing 3 to 4 donors and add at least 2 new ones per year. So there's a myth of donor diversification. So maturing means growing the existing donors, and having 3 to 4 is seen as a fairly well diversified thing. So diversification, at least as far as financial growing goes, does not have to be 7 to 10 donors like it's sometimes thought. And unsurprisingly, they invest substantially into business development, and they do so permanently. That shouldn't surprise, but the old adage goes, if you want to make some money, spend some money. That is certainly true here as well. Those organizations who invest periodically but not permanently do worse than those who have a reasonable investment into their business development, into their grant development process, into their donor scoping permanently as a routine rather than an exhaustive 1-year effort. So to get the funding right that we are going to present to you, 4 things are therefore important to keep in mind. There is a myth of donor diversification. Many donors are very good, of course, but the right ones are just better. If you have a mission, for example, that is highly dependent upon a lot of unrestricted funding, then the EU might not be the right donor for you. If you are, however, into humanitarian, then the EU certainly will be. So just because they're big doesn't make them right. As I said, aim for unrestricted funding. For some organizations, that is going to be considerably more or considerably less than the 15 to 30% band our research indicated. So getting the right band, again, is extremely important. We also recommend to actively manage these large donors, mature them up, not just maintaining their income. Raises between 7 to 30% year on year are not uncommon. And add 2 new donors every year, institutional donors, that is. That means that your business development team is constantly looking out for new opportunities to partner on. And obviously, once that is done, please don't forget to actively minimize proposal development costs. It's a bit like other sides of the of businesses. If you do something regularly and if you do it well, the costs of doing each submission should also lower, and that lowers again the failure risk of proposals. So hopefully that sets out a strategic framework for you in getting the right funding, and then we getting to start on the individual donors. The large trends of the year are this, and then after this, my colleague Balázs will look at the fundraising trends. But by and large, across the donors, what have we seen in 2022 in the first 3 months of 2023? Well, 2022 really was a record year, and that record year of massive funding increases was mainly driven by the Corona and the Ukrainian response. The top funding themes were therefore rather unsurprisingly a lot of health. Education continued to rank very highly, even ahead of health. Agriculture, including livelihoods, was very high on the agenda, as is emergency response, including disaster risk reduction, democracy support, and business and livelihoods once again, so private sector support. And these trends, they do change sometimes in which one is getting more funding and less, but education, health, and agriculture continue to be the top investments of institutional donors. That will likely not change for 2023, but it's going to be slightly reframed as donors are investing more and more into climate change and into climate adaptation. Localization is extremely high on the agenda in terms of trends. Bids that do not have a localization strategy are very unlikely to receive funding. And once again, also in the humanitarian side, which we'll see later under the EU, the private sector collaboration is absolutely increasing, even into the peacekeeping and into the peace and into the humanitarian context, where EU commissioners, as you will see later, talk about humanitarian investment opportunities. We also unfortunately see that the timelines for proposal submissions are getting shorter once more. So more on the management side, you may find it very hard to, it's just getting harder and harder to produce proposals on time, which means that if you do want to add those 2 institutional donors per year, we need to get very much ready for writing those bids even before they are published, because the proposal submission deadlines that used to be 65 to 85 days are now creeping to below 30. And it's very hard to do an international bid, possibly within an alliance, in just under a month. Balázs, do you want to give us a view of the fundraising trends of 2023?
Yes. Thank you, Chris, and also thank you for inviting me to this webinar. My name is Balázs. I'm the director of digital at Mindwise. We're an international fundraising agency headquartered in the Netherlands. So the overall fundraising trends are mainly about individual fundraising trends and mainly about the global north. So these trends are actually with us since COVID or in the last couple of years, but the personalized outreach is now more crucial than before. Retaining existing donors and upgrading existing donors beats donor acquisition, especially or mainly when you have a bigger donor base. So not when you are starting from scratch. What is super important for the donors to be flexible, to make them able to choose between participation options to engage with your organization, and also to expect smaller donation amounts because the countries are expected to go into recession. So another good reason to do donor retentions and upgrade programs, and in-person events are back and super essential. So I'm going to talk a bit more in depth about lead generation and peer-to-peer fundraising in the individual program later on. And I pass it back to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. So that's the overall trends for the funding and the fundraising. Thanks very much, Balázs. That's really good. Let's have a look at a few selected donors and see what they're up to. And I believe Am I right that no, I'm doing the UK first. So the United Kingdom, I'm afraid, is a sad story. So we start on the bad point. There has been obviously later last year another third time round of funding cuts by 1.7 billion pounds sterling. That amounts now to a total cut of 4 billion since 2019. The UK is now falling short of its legal commitment to spend 0.7% of GDP on aid, and it's now down to about 0.5 only. Unfortunately, the government is very unlikely to change that. Making matters worse, in the United Kingdom, we are expecting and we are starting to see already a deep recession, worse even than in all other OECD states, including even Russia, which is then amplified by Brexit. So that recession happening, including a massive cost of living crisis in the UK, with near daily strikes, I'm afraid is not a good background to expect more of funding from His Majesty's government right now. However, with all that pessimism there and with all the outcry about particular how we leave countries behind, particularly Afghanistan, for example, it's worth reminding that the UK is still one of the world's biggest donors. So we shouldn't forget them completely. Education, gender, economic strengthening, particular conflict, stability, and security are absolutely massive. They are very important in this size. Also, the UK is still a strong donor on Innovation Fund and its Small Charities Challenge Fund, linked here in this slide. So when you get the slides, you can use that link straight away, is still a good source of funding. Taking the long view, I would add that it is not uncommon for countries to go through 7 to 10 years or 4 to 10 years waves or cycles of aid and other budget cuts. We are clearly seeing a bigger drop and a tough cycle downwards right now for the UK. But I would warn most NGOs to completely disentangle themselves from UK aid, but keep those irons lukewarm at least when times are better. However, it has to be, the reality is that aid just isn't a priority for His Majesty's government. UK, you can also feel in the fact that the aid budget has been published just in March last month, and that was published 8 months late. So you can see this is sort of a low priority, not very much thought put into job. And that's exactly how we should treat this donor right now. The UK as an institutional donor, as something we try to maintain, but possibly not invest into massively. That would be our advice, unless, of course, it's a mission in these 4 areas. Moving on to slightly nicer and more prosperous themes, I think it's my colleague Hande taking us over into the EU. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Cheers, Hande.
Well, when we are talking about the EU, it's always good to remember that it's one of the largest donors, and it's depending on where your organization is located, where your implementation takes place, there are a variety of programs on offer which would align with both the EU's priorities and your field of action. We know that the key focus areas of the European Union are decided on 5-yearly basis on their strategic agendas. And it's helpful to know that until the end of 2024, we still have the 4 key areas of protecting citizens and freedoms, developing a strong and vibrant economic base, building a climate neutral, green, fair and social Europe, and promoting European interests and values on the global stage. So this goes for both internal EU priorities as well as EU support to non-EU countries. EU is also famous for nominating a subject to each year. So 2022 was Year of Youth, where the focus of funding support was on equipping young people with, supporting them in their areas of interest. And this year, 2023, is European Year of Skills, where key priorities seem to focus on education, training, vocational training to be, of quite importance. And again, with reference to the Year of Youth, to have young people access to training opportunities, as well as supporting women to gain essential skills so that access to jobs become easier. In addition to the 4 strategic priorities, the union always has its cross-cutting issues. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of the primary questions when we are looking at EU funds is whether your organization is eligible for funding or whether there's an EU fund for your organization under any of the EU programs. One of the first things to take into consideration is there are a number of programs run by the EU, some for only member states and some for non-EU partners. These can be dependent on where your organization is registered and where it delivers its activities. So when we are thinking about looking for opportunities within the EU, the initial questions we need to be looking at are eligibility, background, expertise, partnerships, budget, and alignment with cross-cutting issues. With regards to eligibility, as I just said, it is a focus on where you are registered, what type of organization you are, and your role in implementation. Since Brexit, organizations registered in the UK have been facing this challenge of not being eligible for some of the programs. While they can benefit from some research and innovation programs, their accessibility, their access to a wide range of EU-funded programs has affected their pipeline as well. In terms of background and expertise, the question is whether your organization has what it takes to carry out the suggested actions. So do you have similar experiences? Can you show sectoral knowledge? That is key. And also they want to see your relationships with stakeholders, whether you can initiate local ownership, whether your programs have a roadmap for sustainability. And we all get excited when we see a project with large budgets, but when applying to programs where the budgets are larger than what we usually manage, then we are faced with the question of is it really possible for us to manage this budget? And also, can we convince our donor that we can manage such financial and technical reporting?
Yeah.
Here you can see some examples of the programs, and the idea here we wanted to share with you is no matter where your implementation takes place, there exists a program which supports that region of the world. And a program the European Union is either implementing or has implemented. Just at the moment, there are 60 open opportunities only under the International Cooperation and Development program. So organizations, especially NGOs, who are looking for funding opportunities, there are currently 60 grants available just for international cooperation.
Okay, so it's quite a healthy budget there and a reasonable good activity, right?
Yeah. And until 2027, the budget for the external action is almost 80 billion. And that is together with geographic programs and thematic programs. And there is the possibility of combining these geographic programs with the cross-cutting issues EU is always interested in.
Great. Thank you,
I
Hannah.
think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, humanitarian.
Well, this has been on everyone's agenda for the last couple of years, and it is, a topic that will always stay in the humanitarian and development and peace building nexus. What was pledged in 2023 was 8.4 billion, and it focuses on 4 thematic areas: protection of civilians in conflict zones, emergency response to natural disasters and climate change, access to basic needs for vulnerable populations, education and livelihood support for refugees and internally displaced persons. It is important to note on these 4 thematic areas that how actually they overlap with the programmatic actions funded through other programs by the EU. Also, this is just from one of the most recent communications, where the EU Commissioner for Humanitarian Aid stated that the traditional humanitarian donors are overwhelmed and that there needs to be an active look into humanitarian investment opportunities. I think we can discuss that more during our question and answer period.
Thanks, Andre. Yeah, but my colleague Ali and I attended the humanitarian conference, European Union Humanitarian Forum in Brussels just last month. So you've also seen, and they certainly talked a lot about placing humanitarian aid into this nexus of development and peace. So you've seen that then on the documentation already then, Hande?
Yes, because when we are talking about humanitarian aid or the humanitarian response, it is for a limited period. But with the increasing demand and the sustainability of the support that is provided, then there needs to be a joint perspective that includes long-term development and assistance after the initial humanitarian response.
Yeah, and that seems to be a really strong focus this year in particular. Yeah, absolutely. We are currently looking into, I know that Ali is looking into connecting with the commissioner over the next few months, possibly, if possible, to see what humanitarian investment actually means. And if we find anything out, Ali, I'm assuming that we will communicate it here.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I think we're looking at the Germans right now, right?
Yes, thank you for handing over. Yeah, I go ahead. Yeah, for sure. For the German donors, we focused a little bit on the BMZ, that's the Funding Federal Ministry for Economic and International Cooperation, and one of the main implementing agencies, which is well known, I guess, is the GIZ. So the overall trends are quite similar to other countries. It's about health and pandemic preparedness, gender equality, education, food security, and climate mitigation and adaptation. So for this year, the whole volume of development assistance is about 31.3 billion euros. And what's quite interesting, maybe for participating NGOs or other agencies, is that there are specific funds like agriculture and food security, where BMZ spent quite huge amount in the last year, and it's not foreseeable it will be in the same area or range this year. Another option would be support for flight and migration. And for sure, climate change and renewable energy are also key focus areas which are supported. It's always a bit tricky, so we can maybe move to the next slide.
Sure.
Of course, often these fundings are bound by bilateral or multilateral cooperation, but what might be interesting for participants is that about 12 to 25% are normally awarded to contractors, and this could be, of course, NGOs. I experienced that in the past, that Veterinaries International, they received a huge amount for implementing a component for GIZ, and the amount of money available this year is quite big. It's about 19 billion euros, and there are many different projects. Yeah, so calls are normally advertised at the level of the regional or national offices. Here you can find the link. And to give an example, yeah, for sure, the services demanded are very specific, and for sure it would maybe need some advisory if an NGO could be applicable or could have a good standing in this direction. And of course, we would like to look forward to support. Yeah, thank you.
Timo, you've worked a ton at GIZ until very recently, and would you say that the local country office has the purchasing power, or would you say that it's Eschborn near Frankfurt in Germany, i.e. the head office? Who is more important here?
I would say both are very important, because with a local office, you will if you have good contacts, you will know if demands are coming up, and of course they have the key knowledge what's going on in the country and what expertise is needed. But for sure, finally, everything will be handed over to the German head office, because they're now very strict with application for bids. So they are managed by a contracting department. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it all goes back to the head office in the end for approval and contracting.
Yes.
Interesting. That flies in the face of localization, which is another debate, right?
Yes.
Thank you very
much. For sure. You're welcome.
Thanks, Timo, for this look at the Germans here. Very brief. Also, a huge number of commissions here. Thank you very much. That's interesting. So good news from the EU and from Germany. I am to talk about the US, where I spend lots of time, and I'm afraid if it's good news in the EU and good news in terms of funding from Germany, the EU is the largest economy, then it is fantastic and absolutely incredible news from the US side. So the budget increase for 2022 is even bigger than foreseen. The budget has increased to over $30 billion right now. That's a 73% increase in USAID budget. on an already increased year of 2022. That has mainly been driven by the Ukraine and the COVID response again, but the overall overseas development assistance has also increased by nearly about 10 billion to 36.4 billion. So we're talking about large sums, and the UK certainly being very much back on the agenda there. You can also see that the USAID, after years of fearing of not being the primary agency, has moved back to be the primary agency. If the total budget is 36.4 and 30 billion of that 36.4 is managed by USAID, then that should leave no one in doubt about who is in charge here. Most funding is contracted, like with the Germans and the EU, by the head office. In this case, obviously in Washington, DC. 29.5 has been contracted from DC. That's out of the 30 billion, with only 7 billion being contracted by local operations over the year of 2022. So in terms of approach and strategy and who to network with and where to look at, I'm afraid that the localization agenda isn't very advanced here. You have to do both, as my colleague Timo has said, network and know your local contacts, but then carry that knowledge over to Brussels, to Eschborn or Frankfurt in Germany, or in this case, USAID in Washington. In the US, 65% of all the funding is grants. So grant funding has also increased. It's the lion's share. Only 16% of other contracts, and there has actually been a 7% fall in so-called interagency agreements. So USAID is putting its money on NGOs again, and that is good news for our sector. The strategy to work with smaller NGOs is also gaining speed. However, at present time in 2022, 10 major NGOs have received the majority of that funding. But there are certainly ways to break into that, and for those 10 to increase it and secure it. The thematic focus is not all too different from that of its European counter friends across the Atlantic, but in a different priority order. From 1 to 5, we are talking about promoting economic growth and development. So that is all about livelihoods, about local business support, skills, and that has strong thematic bridges to what my colleague Hande has just presented on the European area of skills. Obviously, addressing global health challenges and pandemic preparedness is an area where the EU and the US cooperate, and they are, if not intentionally, certainly unintentionally aligning. The third priority is humanitarian assistance. So back to those humanitarian grants, if you are a large, or if you have a humanitarian team or humanitarian mission, then I don't think you can do without the EU or the USAID in your funding strategy. Supporting democracy and good governance is a long-standing priority area of USAID that is not changing, but is slightly moving down the priority list. And of course, addressing climate change. However, the undisputed leader of climate change adaptation and climate change research is and remains the EU and its member states. Good. So, again, getting the right funding and how to do it from USAID. Some pragmatic tips here. The programmatic and the geographic long-term fit has to be right here. If you have a long-standing history in that thematic, i.e. programmatic, and in that location, then you are a good USAID partner. Breaking into that can be hard, but it's certainly worth it given the budget involved. You do need, and you need to acquire the capacity to really monitor what's going on at USAID daily. If you do not have that capacity to monitor what's going on daily, if you don't have the internal time, skill, or capacity to engage with them thematically and bid very fast, then please contract and consider outsourcing it or adding additional colleagues to that. There is a list to get ready for USAID that involves program design, compliance, HR, program management, and how to do budget administration that is quite useful. You find that on workwithusaid.org. It's very high level and frankly a little bit patronizing to professionals, but it's still a useful thinking. One way, if you're not eligible just yet for USAID funding, is to go via subcontracting. You've heard me say earlier that the largest 10 NGOs are still taking the lion's share of USAID funding. Well, they don't implement it all by themselves. So subcontracting, just like my colleague and friend Timo has said, and the GIZ German side, doing specific things and subcontracting there over the coming years is a good strategy. The slides will be shared with you by my colleague Ali later. Work with USAID is a fairly new website that is gaining speed and has been set up by USAID to work specifically with smaller NGOs, and that is worth registering on. Good, moving on, because I suspect that I'm running out of time here. There are a few donors we haven't covered in this funding update, like Nordics, UN agencies, obviously the corporates and the philanthropic, Swedish or Finland. We've covered them in January, which you can see here in the past webinars. Not too many changes there, so not worth spending your valuable time on right now. By all means, please do check out amsterdaminternational.com/past webinars for the update from January 23. If you are specifically looking for updates from the United Nations agencies, corporates, philanthropic trends, and Ministry of Finance and Orange. What we do want to focus on right now, however, is that all important unrestricted funding, where my colleague Balas is very kindly taking us through lead generation and peer-to-peer campaign, so away from the institutional donors towards the world of fundraising. Balas, do you want to take us in?
Yes, thank you, Chris. And I believe I have more or less 7 minutes to go. So I try to speed it up to have enough room for the questions.
No pressure there then, huh?
Okay. I will still keep then the pace normal. So actually, why I was bringing lead generation and peer-to-peer, because as you mentioned earlier, we see some major fundraising trends for nonprofits in 2023, and that's definitely the diversification of the revenue streams. Especially this year, will bring more inflation, thus lower income in value. So on the top of the donor retention, upgrades are more important than ever. And if you are aiming for unrestricted funding, that will also help the diversification and leads to a more financially stable organization. As personalization is also more important than ever, and face-to-face events are back. I'm focusing on one all-time favorite lead generation and the classic peer-to-peer to compare today to see which one fits better for you. So I don't think that we need to go too much detail into what is a lead generation, because by now I believe everyone is well aware about it, which is basically a meaningful and non-financial action that you are engaging someone meaningfully. That's really about the point. And there are many non-financial actions such as petitions, surveys, quizzes, questionnaires, polls, pledges, value exchanges, hand raisers, message sending, games, competitions, and many more. So even if you think that your organization doesn't do petitions, it doesn't mean that you can't do lead generation. So actually, there are possibilities for every nonprofit. That's the main message which I want to share with you. Regarding peer-to-peer, on the next slide, the question is, okay, what is peer-to-peer and why is it actually working? So basically, peer-to-peer events allow supporters to fundraise for your organization. So basically, you have your own agents and your own fundraisers who will do the work for you. It also has the chance to build new and inspiring ways to connect with your existing supporters, and they can also connect with your cause and your mission. So you can gather those people around a specific channel. When we look into 2023 and how to future-proof your organization, we constantly told we need to embrace digital transformation, and harnessing the power of peer-to-peer fundraising is definitely a great step forward. It's really personalized, so people are crave to one-on-one conversation, and in peer-to-peer they will definitely get that, because it's not the organization, it's a person who is going to talk to another person. This is why it was the peer-to-peer. It's also unique perspective because it reaches far beyond your current charity network. So you essentially aiming to acquire micro-influencers who are engaging with potential donors and bringing them along for a campaign journey for you. And the donation ask comes entirely from your supporter participants. So it also has some social proofing, even if someone doesn't know your organization. So you can also help to spread the word and the knowledge about your cause and your organization. You can also do gamification, and it's increasingly or incredibly flexible when working on peer-to-peer. So charity can scale a peer-to-peer fundraiser up or down depending on the budgets, the plan for the year, the staff, your experience, and infrastructure. So just to sum it up, to compare these two on the next slide, basically I have or we have listed that what is it good for. So it's both good for community building. Both can help you build a relationship with your supporters and also a fundraising contribution. Lead generation is good for building on a large and engage with the community and then convert them directly to financial supporters. And in peer-to-peer, you recruit a community of fundraiser and engage with them to leverage their communities on your behalf. Lead generation is much more designed for regular giving programs, but peer-to-peer is much better for quick cash injection if you are need for that. And supporter journeys in lead generation could be super simple and could go to very sophisticated one. And with peer-to-peer, it has to be segmented as well. So if you ask the question, which one you should have in your program, well, I would say you want to have both lead generation and peer-to-peer in your campaigns or in your plans, because together they engage your community in a different way and provide for different type of fundraising that together form a complete picture. So in the next slide, actually, we just listed a few income streams which a strong, well-rounded digital integrated fundraising program should actually consist. So something that brings you the cash, the one-time donors and campaigns with strong appeals. Also to have a strong regular or monthly giving base, continuously grow your supporter base and community base, so have a prospect pool, and grow the engagement with them to be able to convert the people in your communities, and also to be able to create a mid and major donor prospecting and developing that program, and also to have a path for future legacy working. So I believe I could fit into the 7 minutes or 8 minutes. So I really wanted to give you a sneak peek what lead generation and peer-to-peer campaign can do for you if you are thinking about to launch an individual fundraising program. Back to you, Chris.
Very impressive, Balázs. Balázs, just very quickly, I'm going to sneak in a question there before someone else asks it.
Sure.
And I know this is going to be probably depending on the particular circumstances and on the what you want to achieve, but starting from scratch, how long do you think it takes to build up a good enough peer-to-peer campaign? And is there what do you think is the time to return on investment on average?
Well, I would say if you're thinking about peer-to-peer and you start planning it now, you will be ready to go to have a peer-to-peer campaign up and running by autumn. So it could be built up within, let's say, 3 to 6 months. Really depends on your goals and what you would like to achieve. And as it's a quick cash income, it's basically should return the investment immediately after the program. As you are aiming to get the one-time donation from peers of your fundraisers, then a peer-to-peer program should give you the cash injection, pay back your program, and then later on you can build on a program when turning those people just give you one time to turn them into regular or monthly givers on the long run. However, lead generation is more like a long-term game.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I hope that some of you, before I hand back to my colleague Ali for questions and finishing this webinar, I hope that you will find this useful in a income modeling of your organization. Balazs' idea of peer-to-peer campaigns should provide a quick cash injection, followed by lead campaigns that is more longer term, followed by or accompanied by institutional income that myself, my colleague Timo and Hande, thank you very much for that, have raised. All these three things together should hopefully get you to a stronger funding position, with that about 30% unrestricted, so that you're not just an NGO following the donor agency, but actually an NGO that is truly non-governmental. And I hope that this addition to fundraising that my colleague Balazs here presented will be an interesting addition to your thinking process there. Ali, would you like to take your webinar back?
I will indeed. So we've quite a few questions, so I'm going to get through these very quickly. This is just a quick run through of the funding support that MZN can provide you. For more, check out the full deck on our website. Briefly, this shows that we offer weekly, monthly opportunity notifications personalized to your organization, as well as guaranteed proposal development support. These are low cost and you can cancel anytime. Moving on, speaking of funding support, our two upcoming webinars on the topics of how to get donor mapping right and also how to write better proposals to secure better funding, all very relevant with funding support. So please make sure to sign up to those and the monthly newsletter as well. So we'll get right down to questions straight away. We have quite a few. Okay, so I will open the floor, ask my first question to Balazs. So the question is, this person is hoping to hear some particular advice on how to engage in in-person events.
Well, if you're creating an in-person events, it's really important to create segmented journeys where you can communicate with people in advance. So I would say that's definitely a key. And thinking about beyond your email database, thinking about all of your channels to make sure that you are sending the same messages, and the individuals who is engaging with your content online, going to your website, your social media, reading your newsletter, are actually receiving the same message. And to make sure, if you are creating personalized journeys, exclude people from like big lists to make sure you are not confusing them and you have the targeted communication with the people who you are expected to meet in live events in person.
Fantastic, thank you. Timo, this question is for you. Would you know how open BMZ are to working with new INGOs?
Oh, that's a tricky question. To be honest, I think it will be a bit tricky because it might be the case that they are focusing on German NGOs. And I'm not so much informed how it's for external NGOs or NGOs directly in target countries. Yeah, so might be the case that it would be something to be better to partner with, also with NGOs who are active there, who are maybe based in Germany. But of course, yeah, if you work with GIZ or you're in contact with GIZ, there might be opportunities where you could support with your specific skills for support the implementation. So there the BMZ would not target directly your NGO, but indirectly via maybe GIZ. So that would be for me the most appropriate solution so far. But
Okay. Great.
yeah.
Thanks, Timo. Hande, this one is for you. It's from Joanne, and they're asking, can you please advise of the opportunities in the EU or point us in the right direction to find out more information?
Thank you. Well, as briefly mentioned, it depends very much on where your organization is registered and what your strategic priorities are. That affects finding the relevant program to match your organization. But other than that, the EU has various platforms. For international cooperation and development, there is the WebGate platform. Other than that, there is Horizon Europe has its own platform, so does Erasmus Plus programs. But all in all, an initial step would be a registration and profile setup in Pador, and then taking the steps in their online platform, as a lot of funding and tender opportunities and applications are done through online methods.
Okay, super. Thanks, Hande. Chris, passing the baton to you. This is from Abby, and it's on private sector collaboration. So she's asking, you've mentioned the rise in private sector collaboration. Can you please expand on what this might look like, i.e., do you know how these opportunities will be available to nonprofits?
Yeah, sure. So, who asked that question, Ali?
Abby.
Abby, thank you very much, Abby, for this question. So private sector and private sector collaboration has always been high on the interest for both the private sector, the institutional donors, and the NGOs and implementers, of course. But it's important to bear in mind that partnering with the private sector, with corporates, doesn't immediately mean asking them for a check. That's probably one of the most inefficient ways of doing it. You really would like to align to either their supply chain or their value creation chain and offer them an investment opportunity. That investment opportunity does not necessarily need to be repaid in terms of funding or fund anymore. You know, it's not like most organizations realize these days that they need to be part of the solution in a heating, crowded, and disaster-struck planet. And they are not looking for returns on a sort of invest $1 million, get 1.1 million back basis. That's not how it works anymore. That may have been the case 5 years ago. That has really changed. Most directors, particularly from the finance sector, they are really keen on partnering with good NGOs for good projects where they see their return in their reputation gaining, in their being part of a solution, in them standing up to their own shareholders and saying we are a force for good rather than a force that is exploitive. The European Union itself is also quite pushing ahead of this. They say, look, the humanitarian donors, as you heard Hande say, they're overwhelmed. And in a climate insecure planet that we all live in, they will continue to be overwhelmed. So we do need to engage the power of the innovation power, the delivery power, and yes, the financial power of the private sector in softening the impact of the ever more frequent disasters that unfortunately we all have to expect. So to answer your question, Abby, you cannot approach corporate funding like you do grants or like you do peer-to-peer fundraising where you ask for a check. View it more as an investment proposition, more as an application for a job to this organization, where you apply to work with them. And as part of that working with them transaction, where you set out clearly, this is what I can do, this is what this can do for your supply chain, for any social good in your value creation chain, that will be your benefit. And yes, it's going to cost you some money, but then that's a lot more. And I tend to find that if you position a corporate, particularly in the finance sector, with a coherent, clear pitch saying, this is the damage you do, and this is how you could soften that or even reverse this, or this is the opportunity where you can be a player for social advancement or ecological advancement, then I am yet to see the CEO who does not listen to you, who does not want to do this. So we also don't need to demonize the private sector here. But it comes down, Abby, to having a good pitch, an investable product or an employable solution that they can get in on. Abby, tell me if that is helpful or if I just talk too general. If not, please reach out to my colleague, Ellie, and she can connect us so we have a direct conversation.
Will do. Next question is from Mek in Zimbabwe. He has said, how can one vet donors to avoid some donors who have unclear vision and are encouraging signing of MOU without further engagement?
I could answer that. Well, that is where donor mapping becomes quite a key task for organizations. Before engaging with a donor or before sending an application, it's very, very important to learn about that donor. What are their strategic priorities? What are they interested in funding? Who have they funded before? What kind of projects have been implemented with their funding? Is that, are these the types of donors you would like to work with? And also the same question coming from their way, are you a perfectly eligible candidate to become their trusted partner? So it does take a lot of effort, but a sound donor map, which is a live document with key information, is very helpful to help you choose the type of donors you would want to engage with.
Brilliant, thanks Hande. And that's what we're here for, isn't it? To help them with their donor mapping and all their needs. Next question from Anna speaks about asking, is there a way to know better about upcoming opportunities before the calls are out?
I'll happily take that. Yes, two ways of doing that. Either really deputize someone to focus on that one, reviewing all the committee notes, the project notes that the various donors are publishing, ideally speaking to the various thematic experts in the field, like my colleague Timo said, as well as at head office, be it Brussels, Frankfurt, or DC or London. And in addition to that, publish some talking points and thought research from your own programs and how it's relevant to that. That is a lot of work that takes one person per donor all day for full time. That may not be the most cost efficient or effective way of doing things. Also, if you were to just start, that will take you a month to get ready. You can, of course, just ask my colleagues here who have their respective donor focus to inform you regularly on the new ones coming up. You can also go to a portal, so a notification portal. However, bear in mind that these only list notices and publication notices when they come out, which, as I said initially, because the submission dates are getting shorter and shorter, is putting most NGOs into a very difficult spot. If you learn about an opportunity only a few days after it's been published and it has a deadline of only a few weeks, then the application can mostly not be done, particularly if it's a one that requires collaboration and a consortia being put together first, even if it's on a subject that you are very familiar with. So either do it internally or outsource it. That's basically the two options.
Fantastic. I'm going to squeeze in one final question before we wrap up. This is from Mark. He has said, thank you for the insightful presentation. My question is around power shifting, where INGOs and NGOs are seeking to provide sub-grants to local NGOs and CSO. What is the position of donors at this level in supporting this narrative?
I've had a case on that one just earlier yesterday. Shall I?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. On the last one, bear in mind there are forecasts of certain donors as well that you can keep an eye on. On the subcontracting, yes, most donors price and demand localization, absolutely. Where this falls down a bit is that the contracting and the disbursements sometimes have to be done in the legislative area of where the donor is based. So the EU would like to have is still sending its primary money to EU organizations, because if something goes wrong, they have access to the local courts there. They wouldn't have that outside the EU. And that is the practicalities of it that makes it very difficult to send money directly outside the EU. It happens, but not nearly as much as the language of localization might sometimes suggest. Bear in mind also that if you do subcontract and the subcontractor is found to not do their job or have a problem with documenting their expenses, it is the prime that is liable for that. So you be very careful whom you get into bed with.
Okay, fantastic. And on that note, I think we will wrap up. I want to quickly say a huge thank you to our panel of speakers, Hande, Timo, Balazs, Chris. Really, this was a really fantastic webinar. And thank you to everyone who joined, and thank you for providing your emails as well. I'll be sure to get the recordings and slides sent to you all today.
Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much for organizing this, Ali.
No problem, my pleasure.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Ali.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.